The challenge. The air was heavy with tension. The battlefield was silent, except for the crackling of distant fires. Smoke rose from the ruins of what was once a proud human city. The war had raged for months, but now it all came down to this moment. Commander Jake Carter stood in the middle of the destruction, staring up at the towering figure before him. Zarkov, the supreme warlord of the HFY Dominion, loomed over him like a living nightmare. His armored body shimmered under the dying sun, his sharp claws glinting like daggers. His red eyes burned with the arrogance of a conqueror. Yet, Jake stood there, arms crossed, completely calm. Zarkov let out a deep, guttural laugh. "You are the last of your kind in this city, human. The rest have either fled or died." His voice was like rolling thunder, shaking the very ground beneath them. Jake didn't flinch. He didn't even blink. Zarkov's amusement faded. He took a step closer, towering over the human. "I could unleash my monster on you. So why aren't you afraid, human?" Jake tilted his head slightly, a smirk creeping onto his face. "Because I've seen worse." The warlord narrowed his eyes. "Worse than me. Worse than the horror I command." Jake chuckled. "Yeah, way worse." Zarkov growled, his patience running thin. He had faced warriors from 100 worlds, and they all trembled before him. Fear was the natural response to his presence. Fear was what made lesser creatures bow. But this human, he was different. "Explain yourself," Zarkov demanded. Jake exhaled, as if bored. "All right, big guy, you think your monster scares me. Let me tell you something about humans." He took a slow step forward. "We don't fear monsters. We fight them. We've been fighting them since the beginning of time." Zarkov's claws flexed, but he remained still, listening. Jake continued, his voice steady. "You think you're the first unstoppable force we faced, the first nightmare. You're not. We've fought wars so brutal they left entire generations broken. We've survived plagues that wiped out millions. We've stared into the darkness of space, knowing we are tiny, fragile things. And still, we reached for the stars." Zarkov frowned. "You speak of history, but history does not matter when the present belongs to me." Jake grinned. "Oh, but it does matter. You see, history proves one thing. No matter how bad things get, we don't run, we don't bow, and we sure as hell don't break." Zarkov let out a deep, irritated breath. He had planned to enjoy this moment. Another broken species, another victory. But something about this human unsettled him. The warlord lifted a clawed hand and pointed toward the wreckage behind Jake. "You stand alone. No army, no weapons, no hope." Jake glanced back at the burning ruins and shrugged. "So?" Zarkov's jaw tightened. This was wrong. A lone warrior should not stand like this, not in the face of certain death. His voice dropped into a low, dangerous growl. "If you do not fear death, then you are a fool." Jake's smirk didn't fade. "No, I just know something you don't." Zarkov stiffened. Something shifted in the air. Jake took another step forward, looking up at the warlord with eyes that held no fear. "You came here thinking you were the monster in this story." He lowered his voice. "What if you're wrong?" Zarkov's fingers twitched. Jake's expression darkened. "You see, the thing about monsters is, they don't always look like the ones in the storybooks." A sudden rumble echoed through the ruined city. Zarkov turned his head slightly. The shadows seemed to stretch, the wind carrying a distant, eerie hum. Jake's voice was almost a whisper now. "You've never fought humans like me before." Zarkov's eyes locked onto him, his instincts screaming that something was very, very wrong. For the first time in his life, the warlord felt something he did not recognize. A twinge of doubt, a sliver of hesitation, and maybe, just maybe, the first whisper of fear. The monster within. The wind howled through the broken remains of the city, carrying the scent of smoke and death. A distant fire crackled, its embers glowing like dying stars against the darkening sky. The battlefield, once filled with the sounds of gunfire and screams, had fallen silent. The war was over, but the real battle was just beginning. Zarkov, supreme warlord of the HFY Dominion, stood motionless, his massive form casting a long shadow over the ruins. His red eyes, burning with the arrogance of a conqueror, were fixed on the lone human before him, Commander Jake Carter. Zarkov had crushed thousands of civilizations under his clawed hand. He had turned warriors into cowards with just a glare. But this human, this Jake, he wasn't afraid. "I could unleash my monster on you," Zarkov rumbled, his voice shaking the very ground. "So why aren't you afraid, human?" Jake Carter stood tall, arms relaxed, a smirk playing on his lips. Not a single muscle twitched, not a single step back. "You want to know why?" Jake asked, tilting his head. His voice was calm, casual, like he wasn't standing in front of one of the deadliest warlords in the galaxy. Zarkov growled. "Explain." Jake took a step closer. "I've seen worse." The warlord narrowed his glowing red eyes. "You continue to amuse me, human." His clawed fingers flexed, the black armor on his body shifting like living metal. "You believe you have faced creatures greater than the void beasts, beasts that have wiped out entire civilizations." Jake sighed and rubbed the back of his neck. "Yeah, I do." Zarkov's lips curled into a cruel smile. "Then let us test your foolishness." He raised a single clawed hand, and the air around them shifted. A deep, unnatural hum vibrated through the ruins. The shadows twisted unnaturally, as if something in the darkness was alive, waiting. Then the void beast appeared. It did not walk. It did not crawl. It simply formed, a mass of writhing darkness, pulsing with veins of glowing green energy. It had no solid shape, no eyes, yet somehow Jake could feel it staring at him. The temperature around them dropped. The creature let out a sound, not a roar, not a growl, something worse, a whispering, twisting screech that dug into the brain like 1,000 needles. Zarkov grinned. "Do you still feel brave, human?" Jake looked at the massive, writhing horror before him. He exhaled slowly, then laughed. Zarkov's grin vanished. Jake shook his head, his shoulders shaking with amusement. "That's your monster. That's what I'm supposed to be afraid of." The void beast twitched at his words, its form shifting, tendrils rippling through the air. The ground beneath it cracked as its presence alone seemed to corrupt reality itself. Yet Jake just stood there. "No running?" Zarkov asked, a hint of curiosity in his tone. Jake's smirk grew. "You still don't get it, do you?" He took a slow step forward. The void beast flinched. Jake chuckled darkly. "That's funny. It's afraid of me." Zarkov's eyes flickered. He glanced at the creature, his greatest weapon, his nightmare-given form. The void beast had never shown hesitation before. It tore through armies like paper. Entire species had fallen to its hunger. But now, it hesitated. Jake tilted his head, looking at the writhing mass before him. "You know why." Silence. He exhaled, eyes narrowing. "Because you're not the first nightmare I've met." His voice dropped to a whisper. "You're just the latest." The void beast lunged. A blur of black tendrils shot toward him, reality itself seeming to break as the creature collapsed space in its path. Anything in its way simply ceased to exist. Jake didn't move. The moment the creature touched him, everything stopped. A shockwave of pure force rippled outward. The ground split apart. Buildings collapsed. The air itself trembled. Then, in an instant, the void beast screeched and recoiled, pulling back so fast it left afterimages of itself in the air. Zarkov's eyes widened. "What?" The void beast twisted in pain, shrieking, its entire form convulsing like it had been touched by something far worse than itself. Jake sighed, rolling his shoulders. "Like I said," he muttered, stepping forward as the void beast cowered. "I've seen worse." Zarkov's claws tightened into fists. "Impossible." Jake looked up, his eyes gleaming with something dark, something ancient, something even a void beast feared. For the first time in his long, blood-stained reign, Zarkov felt a sliver of something he had never known before. Doubt. And deep beneath that, fear. A deal with the devil. The world around them felt frozen. Dust swirled in the still air. The faint crackle of fires in the distance was the only sound, but even that seemed muted, unimportant, compared to the tension between the two figures. Zarkov stared at Jake Carter with a mix of anger and confusion. For the first time in his long and bloody reign, he felt unsure. This human had stood before his void beast without flinching, without even moving, and somehow, impossibly, the creature had recoiled. The supreme warlord of the HFY Dominion had faced countless warriors, from the armored knights of the Kalan Conclave to the relentless bioweapons of the Oziri Horde. They all crumbled beneath his might, but this lone human wasn't playing by the same rules. Jake stood casually, as if he were waiting for a cab, not staring down one of the galaxy's most feared conquerors. He adjusted the cuff of his jacket, his smirk not quite arrogant, but not apologetic either. "Well, that was a little awkward," Jake said, breaking the silence. "I expected more from you, big guy. All this talk of monsters, and that's the best you've got." Zarkov growled low, a sound that sent ripples through the air. His claws flexed, carving shallow grooves into the cracked ground. "You dare mock me? You, a mere human." Jake raised an eyebrow. "A mere human who just made your monster cry." The warlord's eyes burned brighter. He wanted nothing more than to crush this insolent being into the dirt, but something stayed his hand. The memory of his void beast flinching, recoiling, lingered in his mind like a sour note. "What are you?" Zarkov finally asked, his voice quieter, but no less menacing. "What makes you so different from the others?" Jake shrugged. "Just a guy who's tired of running." "You ever stop to think that maybe humans aren't as weak as you think? That maybe we've been fighting bigger monsters than you for a long, long time?" The warlord sneered. "Words. Empty words. Do you think you can stop me with bravado alone? You have no army, no weapons, no reinforcements. You stand here, alone, in the ruins of your people's last stronghold. What can you possibly hope to gain?" Jake's expression hardened. "A fair fight." Zarkov blinked. "What?" "You heard me," Jake said, taking a step forward. His voice was clear, confident. "You and me. One-on-one. No void beasts, no armies, no fancy tricks. Just a fight." The warlord laughed, a deep, thunderous sound that echoed across the battlefield. "You are mad." "Maybe," Jake replied with a small grin. "But here's the deal. If I win, you leave Earth and never come back. No invasions, no attacks, nothing. You stay away from our system for good." Zarkov leaned closer, towering over Jake like a living mountain. "And if I win?" Jake's eyes didn't waver. "Then you take me, and humanity bows to you. No more resistance, no more fighting back. Total submission." The warlord considered this. He could crush the human in seconds. He could prove his supremacy once and for all, not just to humanity, but to the entire galaxy. A single combat victory over the last human commander would solidify his legend forever. But something in Jake's calm demeanor made him hesitate. Why was he so confident? "And why?" Zarkov asked slowly. "Should I accept this absurd challenge?" Jake smiled. "Because you want to prove you're better. You want to show the galaxy that even the most defiant human can be broken. What's the point of conquering a people if you can't break their greatest champion in a fair fight?" The warlord's claws twitched. It was true. His reputation was everything. He ruled through fear and domination. Crushing this human personally would send a message that no species, no matter how stubborn, could stand against him. But again, there was that nagging feeling, something in the back of his mind warning him that this human was different. He had felt it the moment the void beast recoiled. "Very well," Zarkov said after a long pause. "I accept your challenge. A fight to the death. No tricks. No interference." Jake nodded. "Just you and me." A faint smile crept onto Zarkov's face. "You're a fool, human." "Maybe," Jake said, "but you'll still have to fight me to find out." The first strike. The battlefield was eerily still. Dust floated in the weak sunlight filtering through the city's smoldering ruins, casting strange shadows on the cracked ground. In the center of it all stood Zarkov, his hulking frame blocking out what little light remained. His black, metallic armor gleamed faintly, streaked with the blood of the fallen. His red eyes blazed like twin embers, burning with anticipation, contempt, and, if one looked closely enough, an almost imperceptible edge of caution. Across from him stood Jake Carter, a man who looked completely unremarkable compared to his opponent. His worn jacket, dust-covered boots, and calm, unreadable expression hardly fit the image of a heroic figure. Yet something about him seemed to command attention. He wasn't bracing himself for the inevitable attack. He wasn't trembling. He stood like a man waiting for a bus, casual, patient, and entirely unconcerned. Zarkov allowed himself a grim smile. He was done with words, done with mind games. The human had won their little exchange of wit, perhaps, but words would not decide the outcome of this battle. Strength would. Without warning, Zarkov moved. He was fast, faster than a creature of his size had any right to be. One moment he was standing a dozen paces away. The next, he was upon Jake, claws slashing through the air with lethal precision. The speed of his charge sent a shockwave through the rubble, scattering loose debris and kicking up a cloud of choking dust. Jake didn't flinch. At the last possible instant, he stepped to the side, his movement so subtle it almost seemed like luck. Zarkov's claws sliced through empty space, carving deep gouges into the ground where Jake had just been standing. The impact sent chunks of concrete flying in all directions. The warlord whirled around, his momentum carrying him in a fluid arc that no ordinary creature could have managed. His clawed hand lashed out again, aiming for Jake's exposed side. Jake ducked low, letting the massive arm sweep harmlessly over his head. Before Zarkov could recover, Jake pivoted on one foot, his movements smooth, almost graceful. He closed the gap between them in a heartbeat and struck. It wasn't a wild punch or a desperate swing. It was deliberate, precise. Jake's fist connected with a joint in Zarkov's armor, just below the ribcage, where the plates didn't fully overlap. The impact was subtle, almost insignificant compared to Zarkov's immense bulk. And yet, Zarkov staggered. The warlord roared, more in surprise than pain, and lashed out with his other arm. Jake leaped back, landing lightly on the balls of his feet. His breathing was steady, his expression calm. Zarkov straightened, a flicker of confusion in his burning red eyes. "You dare?" Jake smirked. "What's wrong?" Not used to someone hitting back. The warlord let out a low growl. He flexed his claws, the razor-sharp tips glinting in the dim light. His muscles tensed as he prepared to strike again. This time, he wouldn't hold back. He lunged, his claws raking the air with enough force to tear through steel. Jake sidestepped and spun, narrowly avoiding the deadly strike. He struck again, this time aiming for the base of Zarkov's neck. The blow was swift and clean, landing on a pressure point that would have incapacitated most opponents. Zarkov didn't fall, but he felt it. He felt the sting, the weakness. His movements slowed for a fraction of a second, and that fraction was enough. Jake pressed the advantage. He moved in a blur, striking at weak points in Zarkov's armor, targeting the gaps, the joints, the places that weren't covered in impenetrable black metal. Each hit was calculated, precise. Zarkov's anger grew. He swung wildly, his claws slicing through the air. But Jake was always just a step ahead. He dodged, rolled, countered. The warlord's strength was overwhelming, his speed nearly unmatched, but Jake wasn't relying on brute force. He was relying on skill, on experience, on something Zarkov didn't understand. The longer the fight went on, the more it became clear that Zarkov was out of his element. He was used to crushing opponents quickly, overwhelming them with sheer power, but Jake wasn't playing by those rules. He wasn't fighting to win in the traditional sense. He was fighting to survive, to outlast, to prove that Zarkov's greatest weapon, his monstrous strength, wasn't enough. Zarkov finally managed to land a glancing blow. His claws caught Jake's jacket, tearing the fabric and leaving a shallow cut along his side. Jake stumbled back, but quickly recovered, his breathing still steady. "Not bad," Jake said, brushing the dirt off his sleeve. "But you're slowing down." Zarkov roared, his frustration boiling over. He charged again, his claws raised for a devastating blow. But Jake didn't wait this time. He moved forward, stepping inside the warlord's reach, and delivered a series of rapid strikes, each one finding its mark, each one chipping away at Zarkov's confidence. For the first time in his reign of terror, Zarkov felt it. A cold, unfamiliar sensation creeping into his chest. It wasn't pain. It wasn't exhaustion. It was something far worse. Doubt. As the battle raged on, the mighty warlord of the XL Thar Dominion began to realize that this human, this insignificant, unarmed human, was more than just a survivor. He was a predator. The truth of humanity. Zarkov's breathing was heavy, his massive shoulders rising and falling in a rhythm that betrayed his growing frustration. The battlefield, once a shattered cityscape where legions of his troops had crushed human defenses, now felt eerily silent. Just the two of them and the rubble that bore witness to their confrontation. Across from him, Jake Carter stood firm. His jacket was torn, his face marked by dust, and a thin line of blood trailing from his temple. But his posture, his expression, those were untouched. His calm was not the defiance of someone who was bluffing, nor the false confidence of a fool who didn't understand the stakes. It was something different, something Zarkov couldn't quite place. "You surprise me, human," Zarkov growled, his voice like grinding stone. "I have fought countless warriors. I have seen death in their eyes before they even raised their weapons. But you," he trailed off, narrowing his glowing red eyes. "You stand here, injured and alone, as if you believe you can win." Jake chuckled, the sound dry and understated. He brushed the dust off his sleeve, a casual motion that only stoked the warlord's irritation. "You think we're so different, don't you? You think that because you're bigger, stronger, and have more claws, you automatically win." Zarkov snarled, his claws flexing. "I am stronger. You do not belong on this battlefield, human. You are an insect beneath my boot." Jake's smirk faded into a look of grim determination. "You see, that's your problem right there. You've spent your whole life fighting things you think are beneath you. You've never had to fight something that could actually break you." Zarkov stepped forward, his immense weight causing the ground beneath him to groan. "And what would you know of breaking me? I have crushed empires. I have silenced entire species. You are nothing." "No," Jake said quietly. "I'm human." The word hung in the air like a challenge, one that Zarkov didn't yet understand. "What is that supposed to mean?" the warlord demanded, his claws digging into the ground. "It means," Jake began, "that you have no idea what you're up against." For a brief moment, Zarkov hesitated. Not because he was afraid. No, fear was something he still refused to acknowledge. It was because there was something in Jake's tone, in his unwavering gaze, that suggested he truly believed every word he was saying. And belief like that, Zarkov knew, was dangerous. Jake continued, his voice calm but laced with steel. You think monsters are just big, ugly creatures that rip and tear. You think fear comes from size, from claws, from raw power. But the truth is, monsters come in many forms. Some of them don't look like beasts at all. Some of them look like the people you underestimated. The people who were pushed to their breaking point and then kept going. Zarkov tilted his head, the faintest hint of a frown tugging at his expression. He wasn't sure where this was going, but he didn't like it. You see, what makes humans dangerous isn't our strength or our speed, Jake said. It's not our weapons or our numbers. It's our ability to adapt, to survive, to take every horror thrown at us and come out stronger on the other side. The warlord's claws clenched into fists. You speak as if your kind is unique. Every species claims resilience, human. Every species believes it can endure. Jake's eyes flashed, his calm demeanor giving way to a harder edge. Maybe. But none of them endure like we do. Do you know what it's like to face extinction over and over again and never give up? To watch your world burn and still claw your way back from the ashes? To have every reason to break, and yet never stop fighting? That's what makes us monsters, Zarkov. Not our weapons, not our strength, our will. For the first time, Zarkov didn't have a ready reply. Something about Jake's words stirred a memory he couldn't quite place, a faint echo of a battle long ago, of an enemy who had fought with the same kind of unrelenting determination. He shook the thought away. It didn't matter. This human was still just one man, one defiant soldier standing in the ruins of his civilization. How dangerous could he really be? I have seen countless species claim they are special, Zarkov said, his voice low and cold. And in the end, they all broke. Jake nodded slowly. Sure. Maybe you'll break me. Maybe you'll break all of us. But if you think it'll be easy, if you think you'll do it without losing something of yourself along the way, you've already lost. Zarkov's jaw tightened. There was no fear in his heart. He refused to allow it. But there was something else, a faint, unwelcome sensation creeping in the back of his mind. Doubt. The warlord took another step forward, his claws gleaming. You talk too much, human. Jake shrugged, a hint of his smirk returning. Maybe. But the truth has a way of getting under your skin, doesn't it? Without another word, Zarkov lunged, his claws slashing through the air with deadly precision. But as he did, he couldn't shake the feeling that Jake's words would linger, that they would haunt him, even if he tore the human apart. The fall of a warlord. The clash of power and precision shattered the eerie stillness of the battlefield. Dust swirled around Zarkov and Jake Carter as if caught in the pull of some unseen force. The ruins of the once proud city seemed to fade into the background, leaving the two combatants as the sole focus of a fight that would determine more than just the fate of Earth. It would reshape the very notion of dominance in the galaxy. Zarkov moved with terrifying speed, his massive claws tearing through the air in arcs that shimmered with raw energy. Each strike could have leveled a tank, ripped apart armored battalions, and left entire species trembling. Yet Jake Carter danced just outside the warlord's reach. He didn't block or parry. He shifted, twisted, and flowed around Zarkov's blows as though he could see the future. This infuriated Zarkov. He was the supreme warlord, the destroyer of civilizations, the terror of the known galaxy. For centuries, his strength had been absolute, his rule unchallenged. No enemy had ever fought him on equal ground. None had survived long enough to try. But now, this single human, a being so small and fragile in comparison, was making him look weak. Another strike. Another dodge. Jake stepped into the swing this time, letting Zarkov's massive arm pass over his shoulder. He lashed out with a lightning-fast strike of his own, knuckles meeting an exposed joint between Zarkov's plated armor. The impact sent a tremor through Zarkov's frame, not from the force of the blow itself, but from the precision of the attack. Zarkov growled and shifted his stance, trying to regain control of the fight. He struck again, this time sweeping low, aiming to take out Jake's legs. But Jake was already in motion, leaping over the deadly claw and coming down hard with a calculated kick to the back of Zarkov's knee. The warlord stumbled forward, his balance faltering. It was a small misstep, but in this duel, it meant everything. Jake capitalized immediately. He closed the gap and delivered a series of sharp, targeted blows, strikes aimed at the subtle gaps and weaknesses in Zarkov's otherwise impenetrable armor. Each hit was measured, designed not to overpower, but to destabilize, to disrupt, to make Zarkov feel. And he did feel it. For the first time in his long, blood-soaked reign, Zarkov felt the creeping sensation of vulnerability. His movements grew less precise, his swings more desperate. He roared in frustration, the sound echoing across the ruined cityscape. "You cannot defeat me," Zarkov bellowed, his voice shaking the air. "I am Zarkov, supreme warlord of the HFY dominion. I am eternal. I am invincible." Jake didn't respond. He didn't need to. The fact that Zarkov had to say those words, had to remind himself of his supposed invincibility, said more than anything Jake could have said. Instead, Jake kept moving, kept striking, kept whittling away at the legend of the supreme warlord, piece by piece. Zarkov unleashed a desperate flurry of attacks. His claws became a blur, his strikes driven by raw rage rather than strategy. He roared and lunged, trying to pin Jake down, trying to end the fight with one overwhelming blow. But Jake's movements only became sharper, where Zarkov's attacks were wild and furious. Jake's were deliberate and precise. Where Zarkov relied on power, Jake relied on skill. With each passing moment, the balance shifted. The supreme warlord's advantage, his size, his strength, his overwhelming power, became less and less meaningful. The more he fought, the more he realized that Jake wasn't fighting to win in the traditional sense. Jake wasn't looking for an opening to deliver a single decisive blow. He was forcing Zarkov to expend everything he had, to burn through his strength, to reach deeper and deeper into his reserves, until there was nothing left. And it was working. Zarkov's strikes grew slower, his breathing grew heavier. The aura of invincibility he had carried for so long began to crack, piece by piece, as Jake remained a step ahead, always out of reach, always finding the exact spot to strike. The mighty warlord, who had never faced a true challenge in centuries, was discovering that his greatest weapon, his unstoppable power, was becoming a liability. "You will fall," Zarkov snarled, his voice trembling with exhaustion. He swung one last time, a desperate, earth-shaking blow meant to crush Jake and end the fight. But Jake ducked low, pivoted behind Zarkov, and delivered a sharp strike to the base of the warlord's neck, right at the junction where armor and flesh met. Zarkov froze. The energy in his body seemed to drain in an instant. His claws dropped to his sides, his knees buckling beneath his massive weight. He sank to the ground, one arm braced against the shattered pavement, the other clutching at his neck. Jake stepped back, breathing hard but still steady. He didn't move in for a killing blow. He didn't taunt or gloat. He simply stood there, watching the mighty warlord crumble under the weight of his own arrogance and exhaustion. Zarkov lifted his head, his glowing red eyes dimming. For the first time in his life, he felt something alien, something he had never thought possible. It wasn't just pain or exhaustion. It was a realization, a quiet, terrible truth that settled in his mind like a poison. He had been beaten, and not by strength, not by overwhelming force. He had been beaten by something far more dangerous, a human. The monster walks away. The battlefield lay still, the ruins around them caught in a heavy silence. Smoke drifted upward in spirals, forming a thin veil that seemed to swallow the light. Zarkov, supreme warlord of the HFY dominion, knelt in the rubble, his massive shoulders slumped. His claws, once unstoppable instruments of death, hung limply at his sides. For the first time in his existence, the invincible conqueror looked defeated. Across from him, Jake Carter stood motionless. Dust covered his tattered jacket, and blood traced faint lines on his weathered face. But his posture was steady, his breathing calm. He didn't look victorious, nor did he wear the smug grin of a man who had just toppled one of the galaxy's most feared tyrants. He simply looked done. Zarkov growled low in his throat, a faint rumble that carried none of his usual menace. You should finish it, human," he rasped, his deep voice almost a whisper. "You have earned that much." Jake exhaled slowly, his gaze locked on the once mighty warlord. "I could," he said quietly, his voice firm but calm. "I could end it right now." He took a small step forward, his boots crunching against the debris. "But that's not who I am." Zarkov's glowing red eyes flickered. "You think sparing me is mercy?" he asked, his tone bitter. "You think letting me live changes anything? I am a warlord human. I am the nightmare that consumes worlds." Jake shook his head. "No, you were," he said simply, "but not anymore." The warlord's jaw tightened, his massive form trembling with a mixture of rage and exhaustion. "You think I will stop, human? That I will vanish into the shadows after this?" His voice grew louder, though the effort seemed to pain him. "I will rebuild. I will rise again, and when I do, I will." "No, you won't," Jake interrupted. His voice wasn't angry or mocking. It was matter of fact, as though he were stating the simple truth. "Because deep down, you already know what's happened here. This wasn't just a fight. This wasn't just you against me." Jake took another step closer, and Zarkov found himself leaning back, not from fear, but from something deeper, something he didn't want to acknowledge. "This was about proving something," Jake continued. "And we both know I wasn't the one who needed to prove it." Zarkov stared at him, his red eyes searching the human's face for any sign of weakness, of doubt. But there was none. "You've spent centuries breaking people," Jake said, "using your strength, your power, your so-called monsters to crush everyone in your path. You thought that was the only way to win, to make them fear you so much they'd never fight back." Jake crouched down slightly, just enough to meet Zarkov's gaze at eye level. "But now you'd know the truth. Fear only works until someone refuses to be afraid. And once that happens, you're not a monster anymore. You're just another soldier with sharp claws." The warlord's claws twitched at his sides. He wanted to lunge, to lash out, to silence the human's voice once and for all. But his body refused. Not because it was broken, but because the words rang too true. Jake straightened up, glancing around at the destruction. "You asked me once why I wasn't afraid of you," he said, his voice softer now. "It's not because I don't feel fear. It's because I know what to do with it. Humans have always been afraid. We've been scared of the dark, of the unknown, of each other. But we don't stop there. We face it. We fight it. And eventually, we learn how to overcome it." Zarkov's breath came slow and heavy. He hated this feeling. He hated the human's calm, the way his words sank in like claws into flesh. Yet he couldn't tear them out. He couldn't make them go away. "I'll let you live," Jake said finally, "not because you deserve mercy, and not because I pity you. I'll let you live because I want you to remember this. I want you to carry it with you, wherever you go. You're not the monster in this story anymore. We are." Zarkov stared at him, his red eyes burning, not with anger, but with the heavy weight of realization. He opened his mouth to speak, to counter, to deny. But no words came. He simply lowered his gaze. Jake turned and began to walk away. His steps were slow, deliberate. He didn't look back. The once mighty warlord watched him go, his claws curling into the dirt. His mind screamed to attack, to reclaim the pride he had just lost. But his body didn't move. His spirit didn't rise. He just knelt there, staring at the ground. As the dust settled and the battlefield fell completely silent, the legend of Zarkov, supreme warlord of the HFY Dominion, would not end in death. It would not end with a glorious final stand or a heroic last blow. It would end here, in the ruins of a human city, with a simple, undeniable truth. He had been broken. And as Jake Carter disappeared into the haze, a new legend began. A legend not of warlords and beasts, but of a species that refused to bow. A species that turned fear into strength, weakness into resilience, and darkness into light. A species that the galaxy would come to fear not because of their weapons or their numbers, but because of what lay within them: humanity.